All right, guys. Well, hey, if you don't know me, my name is Oliver. I'm not Riley. We get confused quite a bit, and so now we're preaching together too. So it's double trouble like that. But we're going to be splitting this message, and so we are going to be talking about gratitude. And so a lot of the worship songs today is actually really cool, just seeing like how that is such a constant theme for each and every one of these songs. But if I could be honest, gratitude. Gratitude could be a challenging thing to actually grasp. It's simple, just to think about positive things. But there are times in our lives where it is challenging, where we should be thankful for something, the blessings that God has given us, and sometimes it is just not there. I can relate so many times, especially when it comes to the holidays too, that I have all these blessings, I have deep friendships in my life, but it's not, I don't feel it. And so hopefully with this lesson, I want us to kind of unpack it and just explain it a little bit better in a way that, at least from like what me and Riley were practicing and kind of going through, that it opens a new level to this. And so sometimes too, we can see gratitude. The world sees it clearly. And so as we were preparing for this, there was actually a New York Times article that me and Riley found together that talked about like how gratitude can be the difference between someone feeling depressed and anxious. And they actually did a study kind of comparing people that had practices of gratitude or reported feeling more gratitude, that they were less likely to feel depressed, less likely to feel anxious. They had higher levels of self-esteem and identity. And according to other people around them too, that they were better coworkers, better parents, better peers, better romantic partners. And so we all deep down, we know that gratitude is something that there is no disadvantage to it, but for us, it's just how do we get there? And so what I want to share with y'all is actually, I have a couple pictures kind of set up, and so don't turn there yet. And so I want to explain this. So these are called ambiguous pictures. And so they're actually used in psychology to they're kind of like the precursor to like the Rorschach test. But what we're going to do, I'm going to show you a couple pictures, and I'm actually going to need some audience participation with this, okay? So feel free to shout it out what you see, but it's the first image that you see. Just shout it out, okay? And there's actually only two options for each of these pictures. So let's go ahead. You all ready for this? Okay, cool. Awesome. Oh, okay, we're already there. So I heard a bird. What else? A duck? Duck, that's kind of right. Yeah, bird, duck. Rabbit, yes. Yes, awesome. So a rabbit or a bird, right? Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, what do y'all see here? A fish. What did someone say, a fish? Like a face, yeah, two faces looking at each other, right? That's one. Vase, vase, whatever. Yeah, vase, okay. All right, cool. All right, next one. Let's keep going, guys. What do y'all see here? A woman. What kind of woman? Older. Young, old, okay. All right, yeah. Either one of those, older, younger woman. And last one. Oh, that's kind of dark. A skull, a little girl. Yeah, so I know, it got really dark here. Sorry, I'll explain it, guys, all right? So go on to the next slide. So one of the reason why I want to share this example or some of these pictures is I think gratitude can work that same way. Either you see it immediately or you don't see it. And there's really kind of like two options. But actually the cool thing is, I mentioned this earlier, is that these were actually used by psychologists in the early 1900s and kind of the later 1800s. And they were these precursors to the Rorschach test. So if you don't know what that is, the Rorschach test is like the ink blots you see in movies and film, or someone's on a couch and they're like looking at an ink blot and what do you see? And they do some kind of Freudian kind of like psychoanalysis of them. But what this is what they discovered is that like you are predisposed to see one image or the other based on your experiences in life. And I think that's such a true thing that when it comes to gratitude, on different parts of our lives, we can all have issues or some traumas or things of baggage that kind of picks up over time, that it gets in the way of us to be thankful at times. It gets in the way, it prohibits us from noticing the goodness and the blessings at times in our lives. And I think too, it's not just always a decision to be grateful or to be thankful. It's also too, it's unpacking some of that too. So, let me get my notes. So for this though too, go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So what I want to talk about though too is Jesus has this idea of like perception that's kind of listed in the Bible in the Sermon on the Mount. And just like even too with these images up here, is that based on how you look at this picture, you can see different things. You can see your perception matters. And that is actually the key ingredient to finding gratitude in our lives, or one of the key ingredients. And so in here, Jesus talks about in Matthew 6, verse 22 through 23, he says, the eye is the lamp of the body. Oh, you need to boost me up? Yeah, I keep going. All right, I will. So Jesus is the lamp of the body. So then, if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And so to me, this is actually this is a bit of an odd verse, because it seems very kind of like esoteric, kind of like very kind of like, there's a lot of metaphors going on in this. And so, but like, the interesting thing about this as well is like Jesus actually drops a couple terms that were to a Jewish audience. This would make a ton of sense. So in the Jewish world at the time of Jesus, when he's preaching this, the idea of eyes, they could either be good or bad, is something that rabbis would use to talk about perspectives in their life. And so just kind of even seeing this, I know in the translation I have up there, that it talks about if the eyes are clear. The interesting thing is like this eye, like the word for clear and good is actually the same thing. So to a Jewish audience listening to this, the first century Christian listening to this, seeing like what kind of eyes is Jesus talking about perspectives here, not necessarily something else. And so with this though, go to the next slide. Oh, perfect. So there's two types of eyes. So good eyes, the Hebrew word for that is ayin tovah. Can y'all say that? Ayin Tovah, there we go. So Ayin Tovah is eyes that typically find favor in situations in their life. You can find the silver lining, the kind of good parts that God has given you, even in a bad situation. It's a perspective that, you can weather the storm and you can have something go completely wrong, but you can still find the bright side of things. You can still rejoice, you can still be happy. And if someone that has a good eye, they would notice, like, how does that person handle negative situations? And do they still have their joy? Do they still have their peace? You can have all of that despite your circumstances if your eyes are good. Now, the second one is ayin hara. Say that. Yeah, there we go. So ayin hara is eyes that are bad, but like you're pessimistic. You're someone that like you kind of point out all the problems and things that just don't match up and line up. And because of that, though, too, you're going to miss God's goodness. You're going to miss the blessings that God has given you. And I think, though, too, like a little even like on part of that, too, is like we can all have ayin hara or bad eyes in our lives. And even, too, it's not just like different, just in general, but there's certain subjects, too, that keep us from seeing that. I can think about my own life as well, where there are things when it comes to maybe like family or friendships, I typically can have a bad eye in those things because I have these deep insecurities or things that kind of happened in my childhood that have just kind of distorted things. But where other subjects too, I might have a good eye. I might see more positive and negative or positive things than would despite the situation right there. And so I think for us though too, go ahead and go to the next slide. Bad eyes, they can come from a myriad of things. It's not just like deep traumas, but they can be informed by our wounds, the scars that we pick up over light hurts and disappointments, insecurities and fears, and the mistakes and failures that we have. And so all of these can cloud our vision. They can keep us from really perceiving the goodness and the blessings that God wants for our lives. And so it's not necessarily like, for us, like we have to be positive all the time, or we have to choose all the time. But part of it too is we have to kind of work and be on the lookout for all of these instances, all right? So let's see. So the $1 million question is, how do we ensure that our eyes are good? Just thinking about this, maybe we're stuck somewhere, maybe you're here, and just with the holidays coming up, all the stressors of life and all the things that are weighing you down, maybe it's stuff with family or work or career or friends, relationships. Like, how do we kind of ensure that we have good eyes in this? And so go ahead and turn to the next slide. All right, cool. So I got 3 points for you. So how this is going to work, me and Riley are going to tag team these a little bit. But the first point I have for you is, get my notes. You have to identify what's obstructing your view. And so the first thing with this, we read this passage before, but like a really cool, neat little detail in this question, Jesus ends like verse 23 with a question, kind of, but not really. I'll explain it. So if your eye is bad, how great is that darkness? And so that sounds like a question. That sounds like, when you read it, that always kind of, I think maybe that's why I think it's an odd passage. But you look at it in the grammatical terms in the Greek, it's actually an imperative. Are y'all familiar with that's kind of a weird term, but imperative is actually, it's a grammatical term that is, it's not a question, but it's implied. It's an urgency. I need you to do this. It's a command. And so it's funny that Jesus kind of even words it like a question, but I think this is something he's really trying to get our attention is like, you need to look at the darkness in your life. In this passage, if I was thinking in Jesus' shoes and thinking about like, I'd be like, yeah, you just need to think about the light more and what I need to think happy thoughts. But this is not what Jesus does. This is not how he refers to it. He says, actually, you need to lean in and examine these things that terrify you, the questions and the life, the things that keep you up at night. You need to lean into that a little bit more. And for you, I don't know about you, but thinking about that, Jesus is commanding me to kind of look at like the darkness or the things that like maybe I'm pessimistic about or I'm not confident in. That can be terrifying. That can be incredibly scary and just wondering of like, we typically as Christians, we can tend to avoid things. We are really, really, really good at doing things that kind of like preoccupy our minds. And I don't know about you, but I am so like that. I could be serving on the worship team. I could be leading a small group. I could be, having like in a Bible study with someone, all ways to kind of avoid me just thinking about and working on certain things in my life that terrify me, that scare me. And a lot of this has to do with some mental health stuff that I've had to confront over the years. But honestly, though, too, we have to be willing to engage and to ask the tough questions in our lives. Deep down, we all kind of know what they are. We have these feelings and thoughts that kind of preoccupy our minds. But for us, though, too, the first step is we have to be willing to engage. And so ending this first point is like, where are you with that? Are you just kind of, do you feel stuck? Do you feel like, man, I don't know if this situation can change. I don't know if God can really help me through this. I don't know if I can do this. And it's discouraging. I wonder, and it keeps you up at night. But where are you with this? How is it going? Do you have faith that God wants to use you, that he wants to bless you, that he will help you and heal you? And sometimes it's easier said than done, a lot of times too. But this is kind of like, these are the things that really determine if we can really find gratitude is, are we willing to start and ask the questions that keep us up? Are we willing to ask and probe deeper in order to find healing? Or have we lost that? At times I've felt that too. And so, but where are you with that? And so that's my first point. And now I want to kind of invite Riley up. So Riley's going to take the second point. All right, so give it up for him.
Thank you. I've not even done anything yet, and now I'm already getting applause. Thank you. Thank you for encouraging them to do that. So this first point of looking at the things that are obstructing your view, I might conceptualize that as being at the Grand Canyon, right? And perhaps you have a sign in your way. You have a person standing in front of you or a tree blocking your view. It doesn't matter how beautiful the Grand Canyon is. If something is in your way, you're not going to be able to see it. This second point that I'd like to talk about, looking through the lens of grace, might be more likened to putting on glasses, right? If your vision is blurry, or looking through the mounted binoculars so that you can actually see the intricacies, the details of the beautiful work of nature that's in front of you. So looking through the lens of grace. Another analogy you might think of here too is, I don't know about you guys if you went back and watched any old DVDs as of late, but we are so accustomed to watching Blu-rays or like Ultra HD 4K, or like there's like 8K now, right? There's like all kinds of crazy, like you could see people's pores. Elise's dad is actually this like movie, like, I don't know, buff. He loves watching movies and everything. And so he has these beautiful TVs with all the latest stuff. And then you go back and watch a DVD and you're like, oh, that's looking rough. That's really grainy. I can't quite tell what's going on. But at the time when you first watched DVDs, they looked just fine to you. And now we're accustomed to seeing things in greater detail. So the reason why I bring that up is that as Christians, we looking through the lens of grace should be the people who are able to identify the intricacies, to be able to identify things to be grateful for more than the average person, okay? Because let's define this term grace. What does grace actually mean? It means unmerited favor. Or even put more simply, good things that we did not deserve that we were given. And so we as Christians, we look at passages, like the ones up here, Romans 8:28, we know that all things work out for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. Now, this isn't saying that everything will feel good, but we have a worldview in which we believe that God is working through all sorts of scenarios, every single situation that we walk into. Even if it might be a difficult one, knowing that there's something in there that God is bringing about for our ultimate benefit. And so that's why we can take on this kind of lifestyle, this kind of worldview, like it says in Philippians 4:8. Whatever is true, honorable, right, pure, lovely, admirable, we think about these things, we dwell on these things because of the grace that is given to us. So again, we as Christians, in theory, should be the people who are the most joyful, the most hopeful, because of the graces given to us that we notice better than the average person. Everybody else is watching DVDs. We're watching the 8K porous views of whatever. Don't listen to the words I say. So I'd like to share a little story here that happened a week ago today, actually, that I think highlights both of these points. The idea in which sometimes things obstruct our view, they get in the way of our ability to see the graces in our lives, the good things that we should be grateful for, as well as putting on those glasses of grace to be able to notice the good things. So if you actually rewind a little bit, to Friday, not this last Friday, but the Friday before that, Ezra got very sick. He had a bad fever. And so as, good parent does, stay up with him until 4 a.m. the next morning. And of course, that happened to be the night that I also had a big project due for school. So, doing this parenting life, the student life all together. And so I'm already walking into this weekend with less sleep than usual. And then come Sunday, Elise is going out of town with Allison. They had a wonderful time going to Dallas to go to this giant Christmas store without me and Ezra. And so I'm like, rocking the single parent life for literally a few hours of my life. And so for anyone who actually is a single parent, God bless you. God bless you. Because even doing it for a day is really difficult. And so like I said, I was tired. We had that big Thanksgiving feast after the church service, and I'm just getting this big headache, and I'm just ready to go home. I'm ready to put this kid down and be able to just chill and go to sleep. And so actually, to take a moment for gratitude, I think people probably noticed it on my face because Sandra came over and grabbed Ezra from me and allowed me to go and get some water, as well as Elizabeth Sevilla. She's like, go and get some food. You look like you need it. So thank you, sisters. I appreciate you guys looking out for me when I was rocking the single husband life, single parent life. And wouldn't you know, right when we get home, I'm just like, okay, we're just going to put him down. He's looking real tired. He's ready to go to bed. I'm going to put him down. And I'm taking him right about to go up the stairs. And any parent knows where he starts pushing away from you and going, kind of making that face. I'm like, oh, don't you dare. And he just starts throwing up all over me and all over the floor. And me, I'm trying to like scramble to find some paper towels to try and quell the mess and all this kind of stuff. And of course, what I end up doing is making 4 pretty significant piles of throw up on the floor rather than 1. That's totally a rookie dad move. And so now I've just got this whole lower floor just with Ezra and me and throw up. And I start getting really frustrated, understandably. Tired, I have a headache. This is the last thing I was expecting for my night. And of course, you got to deal with it. So I'm dealing with it. But I feel myself, in all honesty, starting to get angry. And it's not Ezra's fault. I mean, it's just these things happen. And so within probably about a minute of feeling my heart rate kind of going up and starting to feel like I'm just going to kind of let this anger take a hold of me and how I'm going to behave. Instead, I was like, why don't I practice some of these things that we've been talking about? What are some of the obstacles that I'm facing right now? One is I'm feeling a sense of like entitlement here. God, I'm already walking into this with a deficit. I'm tired. I have a headache. I had school to do and Ezra, and I'm all on my own. Like, this isn't fair. So I'm putting on that lens of entitlement, and it's starting to obstruct my view, as well as some of the things that I've had trained into me that I've seen in my family dynamics, in which when things get frustrating, when things get difficult, turning to anger. Right? Seeing that especially in my dad in my teenage years and noticing ways in which that has been transferred onto me and my own personality. So I was like, I don't want to be entitled. I don't want to be angry. I've seen how that has caused dysfunction in my family of origin, and I don't want to repeat that. And certainly not for Ezra's sake. So I identified what my obstacles were. Okay, I want to put these aside. I want to acknowledge that they're there and not let that rule the day. Now, what can I be grateful for? What are the graces being shown me that actually the reason why I'm in this sort of situation, in this inconvenient state, are based on some fundamental blessings? We had a hard time having Ezra. I wouldn't have a baby son throwing up on me if I didn't first have a baby son. I'm pretty sure he also threw up because he overate, which is kind of easy to do at a Thanksgiving buffet sort of situation. And he's kind of in this state where he just keeps saying, feed me, feed me, feed me. And I'm still figuring out like where's the cutoff line is. Like, sorry, sir, you need to go home. You've clearly had too much to eat. So another blessing here is being the fact that we are in a country in a sort of socioeconomic branch in which we don't have to worry about where our next meal comes from, right? So even in these things that had caused this really inconvenient state that I was in, it was based off of 2 really fundamental basic blessings: having my son, being able to feed ourselves. And identifying those obstacles, pushing them to the side, saying, I don't want that to define the day. And then recognizing where God had shown me grace, even to get me into this place, allowed me to cool off, to be able to approach this with a much more godly response, right? And this is not even big picture stuff. This is just run of the day, like normal sort of like things that happen in our lives. And so the question for you is like, what is your situation? What are the kinds of things in which you take on these obstructions? What are the kind of things that typically trigger you and keep you from seeing gratitude in your life? And what are the kinds of things that you actually need to start taking on a lens of grace, starting to look more for the threads of God's activity and graciousness in your life so that you can overcome those challenges. So perhaps you, like me, find it hard to do these sort of reflective tasks because both of these things are ultimately about discernment and pausing long enough to be able to know what it is that you're going through. Kind of, the world might call it mindfulness. Like, where am I at really right now? But asking these questions can be difficult when you're in the middle of an uncomfortable situation. I'm already being challenged, maybe it's so severe it's an actual crisis. Forget about being able to do these reflective questions, these kind of mindfulness exercises, if it's already in a spot where I'm being challenged. So part of what I'd like to encourage us to do are these things outside of the situation in which we are being challenged. We need to proactively condition our minds outside of these situations with some of these things. And I mentioned these in a recent sermon, but I'd like to share them again because they apply. Prayer and fasting. Being able to kind of hijack in some ways the trains of thought that we typically get ourselves into. We need to do something that, one, verbalizes something different than what we've been. Praying in a lot of ways is training our hearts, training our mouths, training what we say and offering it to God, because we're, for one, bringing it to God who is able to do all things and do wonderful things to change our character. But in addition to that, as we verbalize these things, we train ourselves to think in a different way. Fasting is much the same way in that when you're going hungry and you want to eat, it is like a bodily reminder of, of course you want to eat, but if you've tagged that on to something else that you're working on, then it is just another reminder through your day. Is like, why am I hungry? Oh, that's right, I'm fasting for this purpose, so that I can work on this kind of mindset that I want to embody when I'm in that time of challenge. Another thing here, Sabbath and retreat, is just creating space, enough time to slow down, to take away the distractions of your life that normally keep you from being mindful. Because our lives are just so busy. And so having a weekly or maybe an annual or biannual time to be able to remove ourselves from all the things that clutter our lives and don't give us space to actually attend to ourselves, to go through these discernment practices, these are great ways to separate ourselves and do that in a really ongoing way. And then examine. I mentioned the prayer of examine, which is a daily opportunity to ask yourself questions like, where did I feel God moving the most in my life today? Where did I feel maybe some distance from him? Where did I feel most empowered by his love and power? And when were times where I felt a sense of futility and a lack of purpose and drive in my life? And so asking yourself these questions allows yourself to see some of the threads of how your day has gone and lean more proactively, actively into the kinds of things that produce the better, more godly outcomes. And then discussions with a spiritual advisor. Again, another way of verbalizing, articulating some of the things that you want to be that are contrary to the way that you've been. There's a reason why we have mentors. There's a reason why we have spiritual accountability partners and just people that we talk to about our lives. Spiritual advisor may be kind of the thing that's mainly kicked around nowadays in grad school and all kinds of stuff, but really it can just be a friend, just someone in your life that you can connect with and where you can ask questions. You can ask, hey, how did you overcome these kinds of things in your life so that you can display more gratitude? How did you start to recognize more of God's graces, more of his blessings, more of his good things in your life? And so how can then I imitate those? So there's power in being able to join hands with another believer and walk together through this life so that we can start to kind of take a hold of these things that feel automatic, right? Christian talked about recently just being on autopilot. And that is kind of just the nature of how we operate as human beings. We have ways of being that feel natural, that feel just intrinsic to us. But by doing these kinds of practices, as well as I'm certain many others that maybe you guys can even share with each other, there are ways to change your autopilot, to find new ways and ways that kind of positively reinforce these kinds of behaviors so that you can have a new norm. All right, I'm going to hand this back over to Oliver again. And give him a round of applause.
Oh, I need your notes, man. You got my notes too.
Both of our notes.
Both of our notes. Sweet. Thank you, bro. All right, awesome. So this last point that we're going to talk about is we have to fix our eyes on Jesus. Now, this might be it might seem mute, it might seem simple, but I guarantee you, if you've been doing Christianity for a long time too, we can easily kind of go, like Riley said, we can go into autopilot and just going into different functions and services and ways we approach Christianity without like really being cognizant of what Jesus is doing in our lives, of how he's moving in the mysterious ways that we sometimes cannot perceive. And so in this, though, too, in Hebrews 12, verse 2 through 3, is let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, for who the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. And I don't know about you, but sometimes too, like when it comes every week, when we even take communion as well, like I can find myself I have to be reminded about like what Jesus did on the cross for me. And I think there's so many things with like this kind of lullaby effect. We know about the cross, but like, are we sitting at the feet of the cross? Is our gaze thinking about Jesus? Is our why, like, why am I doing this? Have you lost touch with that? And it sounds in our minds like, yeah, that's totally easy, but it is not. With all the distractions that we can have going on in our lives, all the things that kind of like we have to do, sometimes too, thinking about the cross can be a never to-do list. But what I want us to do is, in this season, where is your gaze focused? Is the gaze of Jesus, when you think about looking at him, does it inspire you? Do you see that when you think about the cross, do you see that there is a God that loves me, that laid down his own life for me, that he believes in me, that he wants the best for me? That is what we have to think about, our why behind this. That is what will motivate us. And if we understand the cross, then a lot of times too, it is actually easier to find gratitude, because when we focus on Jesus, this happens. Go to the next slide. You see, things come into focus. The whole narrative, the whole story of the cross and the whole, like, our lives mesh with the gospel and Jesus, things come into focus when we have our priorities right too. And a lot of times too, it's like you have to ask yourself, how am I doing with God? Do I feel like I'm connecting with him? Do I feel like the times I sit down and pray, am I taking the time to actually sit and focus? And again, this is easier said than done, but like when we have our priorities right with Jesus, and the reason why we do these things is to actually get to know him better, to see him more, and to walk with him, then it's so much easier to find gratitude, despite like when things go wrong, because a lot of things did not go right for Jesus too when he was on the cross. A lot of things did not go his way in his ministry. And I think we have to remember that Jesus, like for us, if things didn't go well for him too, there are going to be things that will have loops and curveballs and different things happen that don't go our way. But Jesus knows that, and he understands that, and he feels that, and that is why we can come to him and we can ask and we can go before him and really rest at his feet. So we're going to take communion right now. But as everyone's kind of getting set up, a couple things we want to leave y'all with is how thinking about this question of like, how do we have good eyes? How do we have gratitude? Well, first of all, it's going to come from really identifying the obstacles in our lives. Are we aware of like the things that kind of like that are troubling to us, and are we engaging those? Are we asking for help? Are we, Do we feel like there's some things that we're maybe a little more defensive on with other people? But I want to encourage you, lean into those. Lean into the discomfort, because it is so worth it when we kind of pursue and go after these things, because there's blessing and promise. God wants to grant you these things. He wants to give you victory. But sometimes too, what happens is we just sit on the sidelines waiting and we're paralyzed. I encourage you, lean into that. The second thing is, what kind of lenses are you looking through? Do you see the lens of grace, or even too stopping and pausing, like what Riley was talking about with Ezra? Like, what kind of lens are you looking through? And is it the lens of grace? Is it the lens that, okay, it might not feel right, but like, let me try this perspective on. And the last one too is like, where is your gaze? Fix your eyes on Jesus. And that, even if you don't have anything else, you have that. And that is enough.